seconds to get logged in, and then we're going to jump into this. We've kept ourselves to 45 minutes, which is pretty tight. So we want to get through a lot. So we'll go through the preamble pretty quickly. And
actually, Robert, when you start presenting, I'll pin you for everybody so that we
okay.
have your focus. Yep.
That sounds good. I'm going to go ahead and pull up the screen, and Nate, if you could monitor chat, if anything comes up, that would be awesome. Okay. All right. So is everybody looking at the Holiday Market Vendor Bootcamp slide? Well, that's what you're seeing. All right. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon on this Monday. Speaking of holiday markets, I don't know how many of you might have had a dusting of snow this morning or last night. I actually came home last night through a blizzard of slush, which was kind of interesting. First time this year. We are excited to offer up this 4-lunch session boot camp. And just to give you a sense of what this is about, actually, I'm going to share the sense of what this is about as I discuss RAIN here. I'm just going to take a couple minutes to talk about RAIN in general. Just a quick note that we are going to be recording these sessions. If and when there are breakout sessions will not be recorded, but we may not actually get to those until our last day. So before we jump in, just very little bit about RAIN, so you know kind of how we came to do this. If you're unfamiliar with RAIN, haven't worked with us within a community, understand that our primary job is actually about building entrepreneurial ecosystems. We are supposed to be making it easier for startups and small businesses to succeed. And we do that in a number of different ways. But I like to share that our primary job is that big picture look, which results in us directly helping businesses, which is what I love to do. We consider ourselves investigative, not prescriptive. That means that when we work with a community or work with an entrepreneur, we do not presume to know what you need. Our job is to go in and listen, to investigate, and from that investigation, offer up solutions. And that's actually where this came from. Our venture catalyst, who you will meet here, in talking with within their communities, it was determined that they needed some support for their local vendors. And that's why we've put this together. And then another thing that I love about RAIN is that we are boots on the ground. We have our venture catalysts who are actually in the communities, knocking on doors and having those conversations to find out where the problems are so that we can solve them. And finally, we work where we're invited. What this means is that we have our VCs, our venture catalysts, in the communities that have invited us in to actually work there. There are going to be several of you that might be outside of the areas that we actually have people on the ground working, and that's fine because we're offering up this virtually. There's no reason for us to hide it from the rest of the public. So you're welcome to be here, but you may not have that local support that our actual RAIN communities can offer. I just wanted to make that clear at the outset. And speaking of those communities, these are the cities and counties that have invited us in. We are funded by them and by government agencies as well as several nonprofit foundations. So these are the organizations that allow us to do this work, and it's important to recognize them. So for today, our goal is to help artists and makers sell more as market vendors. But before I jump in, I do want to introduce the venture catalysts, the people from RAIN who are here as part of this program to help you. First, I'll have Nate introduce himself. He's a venture catalyst. Well, I'll let you do that, Nate.
Thanks, Robert. Hey, everybody. I see a lot of familiar faces. Nate, I'm sitting in Albany, Oregon. I serve entrepreneurs in both Lynn and Benton counties. So it's great to be here. And thank you so much to all of you for giving us this idea as something that we could work on. So thanks.
Thanks, Nate. And Ellen.
Hi, I'm Ellen. I'm sitting in my actual office, my studio in Cresswell, Oregon. I'm an entrepreneur here, and I'm the South Lane Venture Catalyst. So I serve Cresswell and Cottage Grove communities. I'm also an artist myself, and I recently started participating in markets. So I have that to offer you guys, and I look forward to meeting you all throughout this. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Ellen. And Zach.
Hey guys, Zach Denny. I'm out here in Grant County, specifically Seneca, Oregon. How many people here, by a show of hands, have heard of that town? Anybody? There's about 120 people out here, so we're out in the sticks. But I'm the venture catalyst for Grant County. I have a background in sales and marketing, started and exited multiple businesses, and a couple of them were actually vendor businesses. So you're going to hear from me a little bit later today on some of the tips that I've found to be successful. So excited to be here, excited to have you guys join us. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Zach. And I would like welcome each of you to use the chat to introduce yourselves. I do not mind cross-talk in a presentation like this. If you are engaged with others in this community and want to build out relationships, feel free to use the chat for that purpose. This should be a vibrant experience, not just you just sitting and listening to us. So feel free to use the chat robustly. All right, with that, I'm going to jump in. Our agenda for this, for the next 4 days includes, let me get the chat out of there, includes today, tips and tricks for making the sale. And as Zach mentioned, you're going to be hearing from me and Zach today. And day 2, which is Wednesday, we're going to hear from market managers to get best practices from them, kind of figuring out how to engage with a market if you're in that process. Day 3, which will be next Monday, Ellen is actually going to lead us through a discussion of designing your perfect display. And then on day 4, it's going to be about you. What we're going to do is take the learning from these first 3 days, and we're going to ask you to share something you are going to implement, whether it's something that you hear today, perhaps it's a particular type of story that I share about, a pitch, it's something that Zach encourages you to embrace, or maybe you're thinking about how you display in the market, and you can show something that you've put together as a result of Ellen's conversation next week. So it's going to be a show and tell day for you. Ultimately, the hope is that it leads to a better understanding of best practices. So you'll be inspired not only by us, but also by the rest of you here and what you have learned so that everybody benefits everybody else. So today, tips and tricks. I'm going to start by taking about 15 minutes to talk about finding joy in selling, which I know might seem like an oxymoron, but I promise we'll get you there. And then Zach's going to offer up his successful 6, and he's been very successful with this approach out in Grant County. So let's go ahead and jump in. So in order to do this, understand where I'm coming from. I actually have huge sales aversion naturally. That's how I was raised. And I actually had severe social anxiety as well. And we have to recognize that a lot of people and a lot of people are just born or trained this way. And in order to reframe this, what I had to do first is reframe the concept of small talk. I had social anxiety as a kid. I did not understand how people could have these conversations about seemingly nothing, silly things. I just didn't get it. And it wasn't until I was in my 30s and 40s before I recognized that small talk is really about connecting. It's a way to find connections with other people. It wasn't about the thing itself. And once I understood it actually had a purpose, that made it easier for me to have those types of conversations. So that's the first thing, is just if you have a problem with seemingly inane conversations, recognize that they do have a purpose. The second is moving from sales to sharing. When I was a branch manager at US Bank, and And I had a team that really struggled to make their sales goal. Yes, bankers have sales goals. Even the tellers do. And I let them know that their aversion, their problem with sales was that they felt like, and they would share this with me, they felt like they were trying to convince people of something, to convince people that they needed to do something, that they needed to buy something. And I assured them that that's not what this was about. Sales is not about manipulating somebody to buy. It's about sharing opportunities, and hopefully opportunities that coincide with needs, right? It's just sharing. And if all they did was identify the 3, 4, or 5 things that they're comfortable talking about and just say, hey, before you leave, I want you to remember that we have X, Y, Z, and A and B. And if all they did was that every day, that ultimately they would intersect with people's needs and those sales would come. And the last thing is to recognize that when you have nothing to say about your product, about your service, whatever it is, you are saying a lot. That if you have nothing to say, you are either communicating that you have no interest in what you're offering, or worse, you don't believe in it. If you're unwilling to talk about the thing you're trying to sell, you're actually communicating something and it's not positive. So you need to find positive ways to speak about the things that you love and are passionate about. Otherwise, you wouldn't be doing it. So with that, I want to share 5 different power stories with you. And power stories might seem weird. It's actually a process or a curriculum I put together a number of years ago. And I think it's perfectly applicable to what we're doing today. Power stories are the stories that talk about you or your offering at its best. And if you have them at the ready, you will never find yourselves uncertain about what to say. So I know I think about you're sitting behind, or Nate's going to tell you to stop sitting, but you're sitting behind your display at a market and somebody walks by. You should have all sorts of things to talk about, all sorts of ways to engage with them, to talk about different aspects of your product, of your offering, in ways that you're passionate about, that you're excited to share. But if you don't prepare that, then it's easy to just be sitting there in anxiety or in nerves. So you can get over that. So let's first talk about your origin story. So when somebody walks up to you, if they engage you, one of the very first questions they're going to ask, and this isn't just in a market, this is anywhere in business, anywhere where you're networking and talking to other people, one of the first things they're going to ask is, well, how'd you get into this? You know, why are you doing this? They're going to ask questions like that. The origin story answers that question. So if you know that's a question that's going to get asked, you know, why wait to come up with an answer? Why wing it? Know the answer. So when somebody comes up to me and says, how did you get into this work with rain? I say, well, you know, back when I was 11 years old, I remember sitting in the back of my dad's car. We were down in Sacramento, California, in this hot parking lot. And I was waiting for him to come out of this building where he was having a meeting with investors who had taken over and ruined his company. And when he came out of the building, all I could think about was, I hope that he no longer has a job because he's been so miserable. It was years later when I realized that moment, that moment led me to want to support businesses, to want to find ways to help businesses succeed. And once I became a banker, all of this whole path became crystal clear, where I've done for the last 22 years, nothing but trying to improve my ability to help businesses. Okay. That's my origin story. It's crystal clear. And I share it all the time now. So you can all have this, and it doesn't matter what you're doing. You might be making pillow covers. You might be making just trinkets for the holidays. If you're selling trinkets for the holidays, some little craft that you're putting together, you can think back to a time when you were 7 years old and you walked out and you saw this particular ornament hanging from a tree, from the Christmas tree, and going, then that particular ornament just lit you up, right? It doesn't matter what you're doing. You can find a moment in the past that is the origin of this effort, of this passion. There's nothing that you're spending time doing that you can't find a good, compelling origin story for. So that's the first one, and probably the most powerful. Another question.
Can I jump in real quick?
Absolutely, Zach.
Yeah, one thing, guys, that I wanted to add on that is that the reason it's important is as an icebreaker, as a new vendor, right? You're in kind of a social anxiety, or like what Robert's talking about, a social threat environment. You know your story. It's easy to recall, right? If you're coming up with like an elevator pitch or a sales pitch, that's something that's scripted that can be tough to just recall off the top of your head when you're in that like nice to meet you kind of greeting moment. So use this as an opportunity to kind of get the ball rolling, and just, be able to start talking without it necessarily being awkward. So it's to put you on the path to success by talking about something that you know near and dear, which is your journey to what got you to where you're at. So well said, Robert.
Perfect. Thank you, Zach. The next one is your successive mission story. So this is the story that answers a question like, so, why do you do this? Or what's your favorite piece? I love the question, why do you do this? And if you have a moment, I say successive mission because this is when the product that you're selling, what you're offering is making somebody's day. Right. So if you sell, like you could use the ornament story for that as well. I sell this particular product that I'm making because I know that on Christmas morning, when this kid comes down, and they look at the tree and they see this thing hanging there, it's going to light them up. That's why I do this work. If they ask you, well, what's your favorite piece? You can talk about the piece that you're most proud of because you know what it's going to accomplish. You know what it's going to do. And that can seem strange when we're talking about, especially when we're talking about holiday markets, when we have a lot of things that they seem to only have value at one time of year, but that value is important or holiday markets wouldn't exist. So think about, what is the most successful sale that you've had because of what it has accomplished, because of how you've made someone feel. Know that, be able to answer that, because it's another question people are going to ask. The successive vision story is a little bit harder, but it's important to know this because you will be asked by someone like me who says, so where do you want to go with this? What do you want to do? You're doing this here at this market. Do you have a bigger picture? Are you seeing yourself selling globally? Where do you want to go? Right? That's another question that people are going to ask. So it's okay if you say, I just want to be here selling these things that I love to make on the weekend. And that's perfectly appropriate. If you have a bigger vision, go ahead and build out that response now. Let people know, yep, you know what? I would love to be on the cover of, Lister magazine. I would love to be doing this at a global scale. I'd love for, Paul Hollywood on, Great British Baking Show to get word of my pie. It's okay. Sell that vision. But the important thing is to know what you're going to say. The question's coming. It's kind of like going into an interview. If you know all the questions in an interview, you should know how you're going to answer them, right? You shouldn't wait till you get there to think about it. And the next one is the success of value. This has more to do with less about your product and more about you. So this is when somebody comes up and says, so tell me about yourself. Tell me about yourself, which they will, especially in a market. And when they ask you about that, you want to tie in things that you care about, things about you that are related to your product. If this is a holiday market, this would be the time to talk about how much you love the holidays as a kid. between the, turkey on Thanksgiving and waking up on, from waking up to on Christmas morning to, to setting off fireworks, which you can't do anymore on, on New Year's Eve, this whole period, basically from Halloween to New Year's is, this is my time of year. Whatever it is that you value, that is tied into what you're doing there, just know how you're going to answer that question. These are all different types, and you can tell specific stories that illustrate what you love about them, whether it's family getting together, or the opportunity to give back in your community at this time. Whatever it is that is truly legitimate and about you, again, know your answer. And the final thing is points of pride. So going back to my time at the bank, this might not seem applicable, but I promise you it is. When I was at the bank and I was, my team was struggling with the sales process, I pointed out to them something that I find truly, really important for everybody to recognize, which is that whenever somebody engages in a transaction, a business transaction, they have a problem that you are fixing. As a teller, every time somebody walked through the door, they had a problem and the teller was going to be their hero every single time. It's the same with any type of business engagement. I don't care if it's somebody just grabbing a candy bar as they're walking through to buy something. That candy bar solves a problem, right? You are solving problems, and you need to recognize that if somebody is interested in any particular product that you are selling, that there's something about that is valuable to them. You need to know what excites you about every product you're selling. So when somebody's saying, well, tell me about this, and they point to something in your display, you need to be able to talk about what you love about that pen or that fishing fly or that book. You need to be able to talk about every one of those and share something that you're passionate about regarding that particular product. Don't leave anything to chance. Don't wing it ever. You don't have to memorize these responses, but you have to know what you're going to say. So in order to find joy in selling, I believe you first need to recognize that selling is not about manipulating somebody to buy. It's about the convergence, the intersection of your passion and somebody else's interest or need. And if you can develop the stories that you want to tell about your work so that you've got a solid answer to every question that comes to you, you're going to be in an excellent position to do that, to find those intersections. So with that, I'm not going to take questions now. We're going to move right into Zack, and then and we'll take questions after.
Hey guys. So I'm going to just briefly go through, I'm going to try to do this kind of quick so we have enough time for questions, but there's a million different things that you could do to be a successful vendor. So these are definitely not the only things. I've kind of boiled this down so that whatever stage of the game you're at, whether you've never set up an event or whether you're a seasoned pro, that these type of things can, help you get to that next level. So successful 6, number 1, be ready and look the part. Almost to what Robert was just speaking about. You've worked so hard to get your stand ready, to get your products ready, all this type of stuff. Have those things done by the time you're setting up. Your client can definitely tell whether you're prepared to be there or not. And that comes down to, how your setup looks and the language that you're using with your guests. I also put a note on here, aprons, name tags, our aprons and name tags do wonders to differentiate you from your guests as well. So as far as being ready and looking the part, the reason that they put, retail workers in uniform, or why the checkout, gal at the grocery store is in an apron, is they're easily identifiable, and it also, can lead your guests to a sale. And I'm going to explain that here in just a minute. Okay. Number 2 is go vertical. Okay. One of the biggest mistakes I see vendors make is laying their stuff flat out on a table. Okay. They're in the retail environment. Look out in the world. There's literally no retail that is sold that way, where it's flat on a table. It takes up too much real estate, and you want your guests to be able to see what you're selling from afar. So when we're talking about a 10 by 10 foot, square that you're setting up in, or even more so folding tables, going vertical on your stand and having your products displayed vertically is super important. Okay. I mean, right there, you're going to be able to capture additional sales just by people being able to not have to walk all the way up to your booth to be able to see what you're selling. That also goes towards preparation as well. If you have a pro looking setup that's going to come across to your guest, and that actually builds value in the product that you're selling. So even if you're selling like, fishing lures or wreaths or whatever, if your setup looks disheveled and unprepared, right, that's going to translate to the product as well, even if the product is perfect. So I think that's important. Number 3 is point of sale. This kind of goes to like the aprons and name tag thing. Every American knows how to buy something regardless of the store, because they get their item and they walk up to a cash register. So I really argue having a specific point of sale that people know to walk up to purchase their items is very important. Once they've made the decision to buy something from you, you want the rest of the process to be seamless. There's a lot of times where people might be debating on whether or not they want to pull the trigger on that item. And if it's a funky process where you're needing to borrow change from another vendor, or where your credit card reader, whatever, isn't set up, all of those things, again, kind of deplete the value in the product or service that you're selling. So in addition to looking professional, it's a way for you guys to track your data as well. It's super, super important for you guys to be tracking what you're selling, how much you're selling it for, and the numbers behind that type of stuff. You would be surprised how many vendors lug around products to events that they don't sell. They're more like table filler type of stuff. And if you know that, hey, in my last 6 markets, I haven't sold this product, it can open up some of that real estate for something else that is selling. Okay. Number 4, do not sit. Okay. Now, I talk about this a lot, and I don't mean to say no, don't take breaks, right? If you're standing in an 8-hour event, you're going to need some time where you're not on your feet, okay? But the mistake that I see a lot of people make is they'll set up a beautiful display, they've got their products out, they've ran the whole race, right? All they have to do is collect their reward, which is the payments for their goods or services, and they sit in a lawn chair behind the table. The problem with that, guys, and this is kind of a subconscious thing, is people don't want to bother someone that's sitting. So if you have a guest that might have a question or might have some interest, and you're sitting in the back of your booth in a chair, there's a subconscious thing that happens where they feel like they're putting you out by asking that question. I really feel like you need to be standing the whole time. This helps you engage with your client and being able to snag people as they walk by. You don't want to just rely on people walking up on their own volition. You need to be there, almost like what Robert was talking about, with your stories in hand and, kind of your pitch ready to be able to engage these people. Okay. And then number 5 is be engaging and tell the story. Robert kind of covered this perfectly. Until you get into being like a professional salesperson and closer, right? All you need is something to break the ice that makes it not awkward for you and for your guest. One thing I really wanted to point out is, guys, the awkwardness is there for them too, right? So when you're feeling that like weirdness when someone walks up to your booth and you don't know what to say, they feel it also. So anything that you can do to lower that barrier and break the ice is super important. So one little story about that. I was at one of the street fair events that I do, and I was literally explaining this to one of our vendors. I was like, look, if you don't say anything, you're going to miss sales. And at that time, a lady, she was probably, I don't know, 10 feet from the booth. I stopped, I recognized, I'm like, hey, we've got someone kind of by the booth. So I just said, hey, how are you doing? And she took a step closer because I engaged her, and I'm like, oh, thank you so much for coming down to the market. And I literally opened my body language to the table of stuff. And the vendor at the time was selling like polished stones, and he had some t-shirts for sale, and he actually was selling scones as well that his daughter had made. So I said, hey, you want to buy some rocks? Right? It was like literally, I was like just kind of being jovial. It doesn't almost matter what you said, but I was just kind of being funny. Hey, you want to buy some rocks? So she walks over and starts looking. That's like the first part of that interest, right? So we chatted her up. She asked about the t-shirts, and it was just like a nice conversation that we're having. And at the end of the conversation, that kind of awkward moment for the buyer was like, well, these guys are so nice. They've got a great setup. We love their story. The gentleman that she was with was like, you know what, why don't you wrap up 3 of those scones? And the vendor at the time looked at me with just huge dinner plate eyes, because that he never would have sold that had we not just said hi to them. And then later we were talking on the phone, and because he called me after the event, he goes, what did you say to those people? And I go, dude, I said, do you want to buy some rocks? Like, it can be super silly. It doesn't have to be some I'm a pro sales guy thing, but you're just kind of getting them out of their own way to actually look at the products that you have at the table. So engaging them, be standing up and just, hey, how are you doing? Thank you so much for coming to the event. Little things like that go a million miles. The next little part of this on number 5, guys, if you see on the screen, ask them to buy. I didn't want to go into too much detail on that, because if you're not super comfortable with your product, it's probably better to leave this off. But a thing that I even see professional salespeople make the mistake of is they talk about their product, but then they never actually ask the people to buy it. It's like an implied thing. They talk about the value, like that's why this is worth this much money, but they don't follow it up with the question, do you want to buy it? Right? Because let's say if you ask that question and they say no, right? The worst case is you can draw out from them why their no is, and it might be an objection that you can overcome. They might say, hey, would you guys like to buy my jam? You know what? I don't really like blueberry. Great. I actually have raspberry and strawberry over here. Would you have any interest in those? Right? Those type of things. Maybe they didn't see that product or whatever. So asking them to buy once you're comfortable, don't forget to do that. I mean, it's such a valuable step. Worst case, they say no. And I think that's why people don't do it, is that they don't want the rejection of someone saying no. But from like my standpoint, the sale almost doesn't begin until you get that no, right? If there's some objection, you want to hear what that is. And then 2, back to what Robert was saying, once you find those concerns of like the reason why your guests maybe aren't pulling the trigger, you can work that into your value proposition and build your pitch around that type of stuff to be able to cover those objections. So be engaging, tell the story, thanks for coming. It can literally be silly, guys. Like it's more important or less important the information you're delivering as how you're delivering it. So if you're excited and happy to be there and all that type of stuff, it's going to come across. And then that actually leads to number 6. All right. Be happy to be there, guys. I know it's a ton of work. Even for me putting on these events, it's like 3 days of hard work leading up to an even bigger day of hard work. It's mentally draining, talking to people and being out there. We're in the elements a lot of times at these markets, right? So the thing I want to impress though is that you've done all of the hard work. Okay. All the hard work is done. Your setup is done. Your products are done. All of your hard work is done. You're crossing the finish line. All you have to do is collect your rewards now. So I really feel like no matter what's happening in your life or what's happening in your business, when you are out there vending, you need to be the happiest person on earth. You're the most blessed person for having the opportunity to be at the event that you're at. And I promise you that happiness comes across to your guests, and people want to buy from happy and successful people. If you're, doom and gloom behind your stand, it's just people don't necessarily, that's not going to come across the right way. So make sure that you're happy when you're there. And again, too, guys, this is like we've worked so hard for this. This is like the award ceremony, or like the medal ceremony in the Olympics. Like, you're collecting your gold at this point, right? So you should be super happy and excited to be out there. And I promise, if you guys work on just those 6 things, you will see a lot of changes in your revenues without changing anything in your business or your products. And I think that's super important. If we can get you an extra 15 to 30%, what would that do for your business? Okay. So that's kind of my thing. I would love to kind of open the floor up at this point, though. I don't know which of these is most important to the group, but I'd love to take some questions about any of those topics.
Hey, but before we jump into questions, Zach, could
Sure.
you share with them what it is you are doing out there in Grant County related to markets?
Yeah, sure. So we have these things called MOUs, guys, which are a memorandum of understanding that we give to our stakeholders, that basically directs what actions RAIN is going to have in the community. And one of those things was starting a virtual farmers market, as well as a pop-up incubator. Okay. In trying to accomplish those things on their own, we ran into some pretty massive barriers that prevented us from being able to do that. So what we decided to do was pivot into an actual market that we use as an incubator, so that regardless of what stage you're at, there are free events that our vendors can go and set up and test their products out. So whether you have, like, I've had vendors that, talk about being ready and look the part. I've had vendors that started their idea the day before and set a table up and started talking to people. So we just wanted to create basically a place for you guys as vendors to be able to without a lot of risk, test all of these processes out, so that when you do have these bigger events, the fairs or whatever, that you're paying more of a premium on, that you're really ready to attack and collect that revenue.
Excellent. Thank you. So at this point, we are at the point of our Q&A. I'll stop sharing so we can all see each other and just have a conversation. You can put questions in the chat, or if you'd like to raise your hand and ask it, that works as well. Who has questions for us?
I think I saw one in the chat.
Hey, Zach, can I start off with one?
Yeah.
Then I'll let others take it too. I feel like I love this idea of asking people to buy. I also know that a lot of our vendors, you're still trying to figure out your products a bit. You're trying to figure out what people like, what they don't. What would you make of the idea of asking people, like saying the phrase, what do you think? And then, is that direct enough?
So, okay.
Yeah.
So that it's a great question. Okay. That is one of the things where people think they're asking someone to buy, but they're not. Because who cares what they think if they're going to still buy it? You know what I mean? You don't know which one, if they're a buyer or they're not. The what do you think? I mean, it's far more important, I think, to be direct if you're going to go that route. Now, again, it really depends on what you're saying and what you've learned about that client as well, because you've got to have some type of emotional hook to the product that you're selling to them. You really run the risk if you're selling keychains or something like that, and you really go after someone with a hard close, it's going to be such a weird temperature change. They might recoil a little bit. So you don't want to go necessarily too hard. But yeah, the what do you think is what we call a trial close. Okay, so you're testing the waters, because they might go, and they might just tell you what their objection is, and maybe the objection is something that's easily overcomeable. Like you might be able to be like I said, hey, I'd prefer it if we had strawberry instead of blueberry. Oh, hey, here we go. You know, if I had strawberry, would you buy it? You know, like that's the if I could, would you is an old school pro, you know, sales tactic. But again, though, when you're first starting, like all of the wordsmithing is far less important. Like you want to do that to polish closing percentages after you have a bunch of data. You know, you can wordsmith and that stuff like later. I think it's more important to just be comfortable with your people because it's awkward. Like you've never met these people and you're kind of like, guys, let's be honest, you're putting your heart out there a little bit, right? Like we bleed for our products and services and we're so proud of them. That, you know, if someone doesn't like it, it's almost like a little bit of an attack on us, or it's easy to feel that way. So I think just like being happy, having that come across and not being awkward in front of your guest is far more important as to the specific information you're going for. But I would say for pros, Nate, if you're saying, what do you think a lot, you're going to hurt your closing percentage.
Cassie has mentioned she really loves to have have people who are coming by bond with their product, which is excellent. She says it's silly. I don't know that it has to be, but she says it's silly, and I love her last point that she has a harder time making a sale when she's not silly. You know, whatever works. I think silly means engaging. I think that's really what that's you know, what we're talking about there. So I love that point. And then Brittany loves your point about not sitting to be more approachable. I think she meant to say if someone has a hard time standing, to bring a tall stool. I think as long as you're engaged, you know, if your body is forward and you're engaged, I think you can make that work. What do you
100%. Pro tip also, they make what are called anti-fatigue mats. Almost every grocery store has them tucked back behind there. They're like big cushy foam mats. They literally it's night and day difference if you have to do a long stand like that. But yeah, the point of it is more just that, like when you're low and it's such a bummer. Here's another little note maybe you guys could take. If you're buying tables, folding tables for these events, most of them are at like table height. And the problem with it being that low is like your guest their face is up here and you're looking like down like this. I know this might seem weird, but it's true. You want to be almost like in their eyesight with the stuff that you're selling. So if you can get the tables that are more of like bar height or whatever, so they're not, you know, they don't have to necessarily take their eyes straight down on a table. I know that's kind of nitpicky. But yeah, anything you can do like that. So if you had a taller table, for instance, a bar height table, and you have a tablecloth on it, throw a stool behind there for sure. You accomplish that your head's in the same position. So it's not literally about just exhausting yourself by standing. It's more just be bellied up behind your register and ready to talk to these people. But good clarification. Yeah. Yep, anti-fatigue mats. Great with hip issues for sure. Yep, great point, Sarah. What else, guys? Any other? Oh, I see Cindy asked, how can we become a vendor? So if you want to come out to Grant County, I'm done with my series for 2022, but I have 21 events scheduled for 2023. They're free for anyone that wants to join. So we can get you in touch and I can put you on my mailing list. Technically Grant County is going to have a priority space wise. So if I did get to a point where I had too many vendors, obviously my local people take precedent, but that's not the case right now. We have plenty of room. So if you guys would like to participate, you can just reach out to me, Zack, ZACH @OregonRain.org, and I'll put that in the chat real quick. But I'd be happy to have you.
So we are at time. I'm sure, you know, I'm willing to hang out for a few more minutes to chat, but
yeah, me too.
Yeah, I want to respect people's time. So next this Wednesday, our next session, we're calling Lessons from Market Managers. And you've heard from Zack today. We're going to have 3 more market managers who will come with their best tips, best practices, a little discussion about how to engage with a market, how to reach out and participate in markets. Some of the, a little bit more of the logistical things about markets. So for those of you who are participating specifically or want to know more about markets, it's going to be highly informative. Same time on Wednesday. And with that, we'll officially wrap it up, but happy to hang out for any final questions as well. So thank you for joining us today. Hope it was valuable. We'll send out the presentation as a PDF to everybody who signed up.
Right on. Yeah, and I'm going to stick around too, guys. If you have any questions, let's shout them out and we'll try to address them for you.
Thanks, Zack.
I'll go ahead and I'll stop the recording here.
Okay. Thank you, Nate.